Leadership Livestream event. For those people that don't know me, although I'm quite in the audience, in fact I've worked with those people in the audience. My name is Tim Loveridge. I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer for the Data Protection Authority over here, and coming up to 2 years now. I'm taking a particular interest in this, not just from a facilitation perspective, but also from a data protection perspective, because data is all around us. But I'm delighted to welcome. What we'll do is we'll do some facilitation questions and answers afterwards. But delighted to welcome Henry Burden. I was going to do an intro, but I think Henry's going to do some of his own stuff anyway. But just to say, he's the co-founder of Artelligen. I think that's how you pronounce it. Founded in 2016, and he specialises in this sort of stuff. And we had an interesting conversation at the start of the week talking about how to really motivate people to use data better, I think, around their business and what could be achieved from that. So I'll stop talking and introduce Henry.
Thank you very much, Tim and Kate, and nice to meet you all. I'm joining you live by satellite from Jersey, from digital Jersey, which I have to say, rather embarrassingly, I couldn't connect to the Wi-Fi when I came into the room. So I'm actually connected to you by 4G, which is amazing, but potentially might present some problems. So forgive me if we have that, but so far so good. So I will share my screen and get the slides up. And as Tim said, my presentation today is about why your business should become data-driven. And now, how do I? There we go. What we're going to talk about over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to give you a quick introduction. We're going to look at an example of a data-driven business. We're going to talk about the data revolution, how you can get started, some of the challenges that you might encounter, and 8 steps for change within your organization. So just as a brief intro into me and Artelligen, we call ourselves a full-service digital growth agency. What's that? Well, we develop data-driven digital strategies to maximize businesses' growth potential. We do that in 3 key areas. It's about acquiring new customers, keeping existing ones, and primarily through improving customer experience, but also through being more profitable, which is about business automation. We are experts in digital marketing of all aspects, data strategy, advanced analytics, and in particular something conversational AI, which is using computers to talk to people with natural language. The fundamental focus of our business is about return on investment. So every project that we undertake, or indeed any digital project that anyone undertakes, data or otherwise, should always have a return on investment that is clearly definable and fully transparent. So to start with, what do all these companies have in common? Apart from the fact that they are multi-billion-dollar businesses, they are all data-driven. And what I want to get across to you today is that it doesn't matter how big your business is or what sector your business is in, everybody can, should, and must adopt a data-driven approach if you want to survive the next 10 years. That all those companies use data, and primarily they use data to do the following: to spot and also predict new market trends, continuously improve customer experience, to make smarter decisions, to make faster decisions, to identify the right growth opportunities, and also to automate where possible. Those businesses are fact-based rather than gut feel. They are predictive rather than reactive, and they are automated rather than manual, and they operate in real time rather than after the fact. So that to me is really the goal of becoming data-driven. Those things there: being more agile, being more responsive, being more efficient, and doing things in real time rather than relying on historical data. Ultimately, these data-driven business examples build tools and capabilities, and most importantly, a culture that acts on data. Now, before I go on, I think it's important to note that data on its own is not necessarily the answer. Data and human wisdom is the trick. So be led by data, be driven by data, but that data has to be, we're not talking about replacing the really valuable human insights and creativity at this stage anyway. And I want to focus on one example in particular, and it's a business called HelloFresh. And I don't know, you've probably heard of it in Guernsey. They're quite big in Jersey at the moment, but it's a global business, and they sell meal kits to people. You can order a box for a week, and it will be lots and lots of different meals, and in each of the kits will be every single ingredient you'll need to make the meal and a meal card. Sounds like a great idea. They started back in 2011, and over that time, over the following 6 years, the meal kit industry exploded, and over $1 billion of capital was injected into that startup scene by venture capital. But over the 6-year period, most of these businesses failed. And the one that has emerged pretty much victorious is HelloFresh. And one of the primary reasons why they have won the race to dominate the meal kit market is that they are a very data-driven business. And some examples of what they're doing, they're mining vast amounts of Google search data in order to identify customer trends. In other words, they can predict which foods are more likely to be popular at certain times of the year, so that they can flexibly adjust the offers and the promotions around that. And of course, it's not just going to be, we're talking about individual countries as well. So what's popular in December in the States is going to be different to what's popular in December in Indonesia, for example. So they're able to run a very much more predictive and dynamic offering than simply a kind of one-size-fits-all product. They also use their customer data very effectively in order to predict individual customer preferences. So, for example, they have a customer who regularly eats fish on a Friday. They will be targeted with a specific and appropriate offer in time for the Friday. They're also using data, interestingly, to innovate new recipe ideas. Traditionally, a company like this would have a team, and they do, but would rely on a team of chefs trying new things in a kitchen environment, seeing what works and what doesn't. What HelloFresh are doing is using scientific data, food data, what they know about the chemical properties of different food types and flavors and things like that, in order to innovate new ideas before they get to the kitchen stage. And they're describing it as procedurally generating new and interesting ideas. And then, of course, those ideas can be tested on their large customer base to see what works and what doesn't. So a really good example of a company that, of course, started from scratch using data, but just shows you how much of an advantage it can give you if you're creative and use your data effectively. So, in my view, becoming a data-driven business is actually essential for growth, profitability, and ultimately survival. And as I said at the beginning, it doesn't matter how big your business is, or indeed what business you're in, because ultimately the goal is to turn data into information and information into insight. And that is from a quote from a lady who was formerly chair of Hewlett Packard. And it's a very important point. As I said earlier, data on its own is useless. But when we can use our human creativity and insights to turn data into information, to know what it is that we want to know, and then turn that information into insight, we're now able to make much better decisions. But in fact, as we all know in business, business has always been about data. We've always needed to know things. And in particular, we've always wanted to know who are our customers? What do they want? How can we better meet their needs? How can we operate our business more profitably? Who are our competitors? What are they doing? And what are the market trends? You know, businesses survive and fail for want of this information. And in the past, we always relied upon the analog methods of answering those questions. We could get someone to carry out market research for us, but inevitably old market research techniques relied on a limited sample and therefore is potentially much lower in resolution. We can hypothesize and test things, but how long until you get it right? We can use our experience and our instinct, which is important, but on its own is prone to bias and doesn't necessarily anticipate change. We can always, very importantly, rely on customer feedback, and that's still a hugely important source of data for us. But we don't necessarily know whether we're getting the right, getting an honest view from our customers. A lot of businesses rely on business as usual. My business operates for the 10 years, it's always been good for me, but could it be better? We could rely on the vast amount of historical data that our business has built up over the years in various forms, but is it still relevant? So there are lots of disadvantages, or there are lots of challenges around the old ways of finding out what we needed to know. So what's different now? Well, fundamentally, it's the digital or the data revolution. In my view, many people's view, the data revolution is the most profound human development since we came up with the idea of agriculture. The volume of data in the world is growing 4 times faster than the global economy. Every day, 10 million Blu-ray discs, or the equivalent of 10 million Blu-ray discs, is created in data. That's 4 times the height of the Eiffel Tower if you stack those Blu-ray discs up end to end every day. Google is processing 3.5 billion searches a day, and Facebook, for good or bad, is collecting 500 terabytes of data a day, and that's growing all the time. We send nearly 400 billion emails a day. We make 450 billion online transactions each day. There are now 20 billion connected devices. That's everything from mobile phones to IoT. And in fact, the average company already has 100 terabytes of data in whatever form it has it. But interestingly, only 1% of company data is currently being leveraged or analyzed in order to derive some value from it. Connected vehicles, the sort of the latest vehicles that are communicating to the manufacturer all the time, they're producing 25 gigabytes of data per hour. Now, I mention all these things because it gives you an idea of the direction of travel in terms of data. And this, I think, lends itself to the notion of the need to become data-driven, not just because it represents an opportunity for growth, but because it represents a significant threat. Because if you don't make use of the data that is available to you, you can guarantee that someone else will. And that is a threat, and we're seeing it in lots of industries, the disruption effect of the Uberization, the Airbnbs, who are coming into markets from a standing start, but because they understand how to leverage data and technology, they have completely blown away legacy businesses that have been established for, in some cases, decades and possibly even hundreds of years. So it's a sense of, everyone needs to have this sense of these things are exponential. And by that I mean it's a continuously compounding effect. The amount of data we're creating, the amount of devices creating data is growing exponentially. And that can only mean one thing, that if we don't start to make sense of the data, we'll either be overwhelmed by it or we'll be out of business. But interestingly, of all the data that I've talked about, 90% of it is what we call unstructured and is currently not being utilized. So there's a huge opportunity there for people that can bring data together, make sense of it, and derive insights from it, either for themselves, for their clients, or indeed to sell, as we've seen with, I guess, Google, or any number of businesses. Preqin is another business that some of you guys in Guernsey might be familiar with in the private equity space. You know, they've built a huge multi-million-dollar business by gathering mostly open source data together and presenting it in a way that people find value in. So where do you start then? And I'm aware that the audience is a mix of businesses, from finance, big, small, medium, perhaps legal. But it's the same for everybody, really. Ultimately, we need to start small, because one thing's for sure, it's a significant challenge. And if we try and boil the ocean, as they say, then we're likely to fail and people won't see the benefits. So the first thing we need to do is to ask ourselves, what is it that we need to know? It's a very simple start point. And as we covered previous slide, it's probably something along the lines of, who are our best customers? How much are they worth to us? What is it that they want? And how can we best acquire some more or engage with them? As an example, customer acquisition. We also want to identify quick wins. This is important because if you can spot the low-hanging fruit, something that is simple, achievable, relatively high value, and relatively low risk, then the organization, your business, will be able to gain confidence in the power of data and your ability to leverage it. We also should look for opportunities for automation, for efficiency, because not only can we derive insight from data, but potentially we can use that data to power automations. And that, you know, simply taking processes that are currently being done manually and turning those into automated processes that run in the background. So when we've identified a low-hanging fruit question to ask, some low-hanging fruit, we then need to think about what data we have available to us in order to answer that question or to solve the problem that we're looking to solve. Now, there are lots of different types of data, and I think it's worth briefly going over those. I mentioned earlier the idea of unstructured data. So there's two types of data. We have structured and we have unstructured. Examples of structured data: internal. On the left there, we've got internal and external. By that I mean data that you might have in the business and external data that is outside of the business. So we have examples of structured internal data would be, for example, your customer list. It might be financial data. It might be transaction data. And by structured, I mean that it is already labeled. It might be, a good example is a spreadsheet. That is structured data. In terms of unstructured data within the business, these are documents, PDFs, emails, perhaps photos or videos. Now, unstructured data is very interesting because on the one hand, it's very difficult to do something with unstructured data straight away. You can see that with a spreadsheet, you can already start playing around with it, getting some insights, etc. But with a PDF document or an email, we need to get it into a structured format in order to be able to do something with it. Now, there are lots of tools out there for structuring data, CRM systems, structured data, but of course you've got to get the data from its unstructured form into its structured form. And therein can lie a huge amount of time and complexity in doing that. But as I said before, 90% of the world's data is unstructured and is currently being unused. If you can extract structured data from unstructured data and utilize it, it is an incredibly powerful tool. And I'll give you an example. There's a company who is revolutionizing HR. They have analyzed millions and millions of emails from companies and built a model that can predict employees who are likely to be unhappy. And you can imagine that in the run-up to somebody leaving and suing you for unfair dismissal or constructive dismissal or whatever it is, there's a chain of events that happens before that. For example, they send an email to their line manager unhappy about something. And they've taken all of that data. They can come into a company, set up a model that analyzes all the email traffic and alerts the HR department to potential problems before they happen. It sounds a bit big brotherish, but we all analyze company emails anyway, but it can help the employee and save the company huge amounts of time and effort in finding someone new, handling a court case, and all that kind of stuff. So that's an example of extracting value from unstructured data. Another example, particularly in the legal profession over in Guernsey, would be there are companies who are now offering services around predicting the outcome of a court case based on a huge number of data points, but not least the fact that they have analyzed the transcripts of millions of court cases and the outcomes, and just from analyzing the court documents, they're able to predict within something like 95% accuracy the outcome of the case. So that's using unstructured data. So that's data that you might have, data you might have within the business. This is the internal, structured and unstructured. But what's really powerful is also to know that there's a huge amount of data out there that is external to the business that can be utilized. Now, there are people selling data, and I'm not just talking about customer data, I'm talking about data sets in general. For example, open data, where you can have, a lot of governments in many countries around the world are making data sets available for free. So you can get all road accidents in the UK from 1954 to 2008, and lots of different data points around that. You can increasingly, and it depends on the application, of course, increasingly use sensor data. Now, there are companies out there that are specializing in, for example, facilities management, where using the sensor data in a building, they can help building managers and building owners to manage that asset much more efficiently. For example, to predict servicing requirements for boilers, or to identify when there might be some sort of biological outbreak, E. coli or something like that, using sensor data. We also have publicly available data like Google, as we saw in the HelloFresh example. Google Trends in particular is a very useful tool which Google provides, which allows people to see what people are searching for. So if you put a term into Google Trends, you can see how popular that trend is, where it's at, like a line that says, actually no one's interested in this, or oh my goodness, last year this spiked in December. Well, maybe that's because people are interested in it in December. Another example of external data is credit reports. If you were onboarding clients and you needed to perhaps automate the KYC process, you might pull together disparate data sets from WorldCheck and others, but Equifax or those data providers, in order to create a risk profile of a new client. But equally, there's a lot of unstructured external data out there, social media being one. Publications, online reviews, and I mentioned geospatial imagery there. I'm not sure that's perhaps of interest to anyone here, but there's a lot of satellite data available now, and there are investors who are using geospatial imagery to predict the stock market. So one in particular who was buying images from a satellite provider of Walmart car parks in the States, and analyzing the volume of cars in the car parks over the year in order to predict the likely revenues of the business and make investment decisions off the back of it. So those are the types of data. But having identified what you want to know, look to the business, see what type of data you've got. And data might not be in a clean format. In fact, it's almost certainly not going to be in a clean format. So there's an element of looking at what data you have, looking at how clean it is, how relevant you think it is, what the integrity of the data might be like, how old is it still relevant? So it's not just a case of identifying a data set and bringing it in, but you also need to make sure that you're happy with the quality and integrity of that data and the relevancy of it too. But of course, there are always challenges with doing anything like this. And one of the ones that is top of the list, of course, is around privacy regulations. And this is something Tim and I were talking about earlier in the week. A lot of businesses, since GDPR has come in, are incredibly wary about collecting, processing, and holding customer data, and understandably so. However, I think it's a great opportunity, GDPR, because yes.
Well, we've lost you, Henry. Henry, sorry.
We shouldn't, because people don't want to.
Could we ask you to just backtrack about 10 seconds? We lost your connection for a second.
Sure.
Okay.
So just talking about privacy and GDPR and how companies are inevitably wary about customer data and holding customer data, and they should be. But I think it presents an opportunity because every 3 months or however often you feel is necessary, or how often the regulations require you to, it's a really great opportunity to reach out to your customers and say, are you still happy for us to hold your data? Because you get from that a really good indication about who is still your customer, who is still interested in what you have to offer. And it's another opportunity to engage with customers. So provided you are following the regulations, it's a real opportunity. And I think the biggest opportunity for data-driven businesses is to know your customer in increasingly more detail. And so customer data is huge, but obviously there are risks that you need to be aware of. Another challenge is what we call siloed thinking. So inevitably, when you do your data inventory, when you're looking to do your first project, you will find that there's some data that exists in one department, some data exists in another. And not only have you got the challenge of bringing it together and trying to create something whole from it, but also you might have the challenge of persuading people that to take their data off them. So the business needs to think as a business when doing this kind of project. Data integrity is a challenge we mentioned. If you put rubbish in, you will get rubbish out. So it's important not to be completely reliant on data without having checked its accuracy, relevancy, and integrity. Another challenge for businesses, of course, is having the right skills. You know, not every business has a chief information officer, and not every business will have somebody in it who has the necessary skills to format data, to bind data sets, or to run these kind of projects. But that's when it's worth reaching out to an expert. And of course, having the right tools, like anything. I mean, I've put 3 things on that having the right tools here. One of them is CRM. That's customer relationship management systems. CRM should be the engine room of any business. And most people do have a CRM system, but I would suggest very few businesses are using their CRM system to the fullest effect. And nowadays, you have some incredibly sophisticated, but actually relatively inexpensive solutions out there that are building in things like predictive AI, so that it can tell you which customers are going to do something or which customers are going to buy. Or, there's a hugely powerful tools out there that you can get off the shelf. Another tool, so sort of working our way up the sort of complexity scale, another tool is Alteryx. This is something that is offered by a company in Jersey called Continuum. Alteryx is a data wrangling platform, which means it can take data in lots of different forms and very easily, or relatively easily, and automate the process of cleaning that data, formatting that data, and preparing it to be used to gain insights and to drive the business. And I mentioned machine learning as a third point here. Most of you will have heard of machine learning. It's not about machine learning, my presentation, because my point is everyone and anyone who is in business should be doing this kind of thing. But machine learning is an increasingly common way for businesses to extract value from data. Generally speaking, big data, but there are lots of third-party applications on the market right now which will deliver you machine learning capabilities. One I'd like to mention is called Crystal Knows, and it is a personality prediction engine, and it takes structured and unstructured text, social media profiles, anything that you want to throw at it about a given person, and it will predict their personality. And I have to say, I find it very, very accurate. It will even tell you how you should approach that person in terms of a sales pitch or in terms of a job offer. It will tell you how you should, the way you should write it. You know, if you're writing an email, it will even say, don't say that, say this, say this. Incredibly powerful. It's a Chrome extension, but it's delivering very powerful machine learning technology in the personality space in order to optimize sales and recruitment and all sorts of other things, but also customer relationship management. So lastly, because I think I'm 10 minutes over, but just very quickly, some of you might be familiar with this change management model, 8 steps for change to become a data-driven business. create a sense of urgency in the organization, explain to your stakeholders, colleagues, business partners, the importance of becoming data-driven, and get on it now. Build that coalition, find the stakeholders that will benefit from this, bring them together, and get them excited about the opportunity. Develop a vision and a strategy. What are we going to be doing? Where are we going from here? Communicate that vision at all levels within the organization. Empower people within the organization to take ownership of the data challenge of the opportunity. And as I mentioned earlier, generate short-term wins. If you can get a short-term win, you will get people excited about the potential to become more data-driven. Always keep track of the lessons that you learn along the way and keep looking ahead. And finally, you can institutionalize this change by giving people responsibility for data. If you don't have a chief data officer or CIO, make somebody responsible for data. Encourage that kind of cultural structure within the business to be data-driven. And the last thing I'll leave you with is a quote from a report by McKinsey talking about using customer data. Businesses that use customer data effectively are 23 times more likely to acquire customers. They're 6 times more likely to keep a customer, and they're 19 times more likely to be more profitable than their competitors. So it's a huge business opportunity, and one that I would urge you all to seriously consider adopting. That was 30 minutes, wasn't it?
Ish.
More than, less than.
Okay, brilliant. Can you pop back up to full screen so we can see yourself as a there you are. Very large head now. Thank you, Henry. What we wanted to do is actually just have a bit of a Q&A session at the end of this and just talk about it and ask Henry to answer some questions from the audience. So, do you have anything specific you want to explore with him? Curious.
Yeah, if you were presenting the proposal of dynamically charging from a very traditional old style of business to a data-driven business, one of the key elements that you have to try and sell to the board and the management and say, benefits versus cost. I think everybody's, they love that principle of being averse to change. When you're actually trying to promote the essential nature of actually data-driven business, often has to turn to risk remediation, reduction of overheads, manual processes, and things like that.
Yeah, so I think that if you went into a board meeting with anything other than a clear idea of what it was you were going to do and a clear target return on investment, I think you would be wasting your time. And that's what I mean about starting small. I think everybody could get excited and in principle be behind the idea of being more data driven, but in terms of actually making an investment in it, I think it would be worth just identifying that piece of low-hanging fruit, quantifying the value of that low-hanging fruit, doing some work around the potential cost of addressing that, of harvesting that low-hanging fruit, but having that in the context of the return on investment. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Worth mentioning. There's a strategy to presentation. Sorry, it's probably be worth mentioning. There's a definite strategy towards the presentation of this proposal of having a great data-driven business, because people are quite entrenched in their thinking. Convincing people to make a bold step into a new environment, rather than being sort of driven by paper that's arriving through the door, thinking forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one way of I would present it, in a way I think I have hopefully this afternoon is, if you can point to an example of a business in your sector that is doing something then, and I think there are lots of examples out there. It can help to focus people's minds, but I think you're right. There's a kind of generational thing here. I think a lot of people hear the word data and it sends a shiver down their spine. So that is a challenging thing. Absolutely, I'd agree.
Yeah, I'll just comment on that as well, because I think it's not always just about profit, right? So I live in the world of regulation, and whether you think of tax authorities as regulators as well, but to be basis. But one of the most forward-thinking organisations I've spent time with over the last 3 years was HMRC in the UK, and they're using predictive technology based on big data extensively now. It's amazing how they use that. But it's very forward-thinking. It's not about profit. It's about being an effective tax collector, regulator, all these other things that we have to do, these different disciplines. So,
yes, which is why I'm actually risk remediation as well from a non-banking point of view, or from a regulatory point of view. With the average GDPR, the regulators have much more teeth now in terms of fining and the impact on business reputation as well. That's a slightly separate subject.
But regulators increasingly are spread thin, so they have to be able to be better at predicting, and so that requires good quality data and utilising it effectively.
Yeah.
Any other questions, John?
You mentioned rubbish in, rubbish out, which made me think, and a lot of the advantages of the digital data collection idea, really. You mentioned being about smart reactions, speed, agility, evidence-based rather than gut-based, proactive rather than reactive. I say all those things because I'm a member of the States of Guernsey, and I meet my States of Jersey colleagues every so often, and they're wrestling with similar problems to ourselves. And a lot of those data-based problem-solving approaches aren't particularly evident historically in political thinking, in that we tend to be reactive on historical information rather than predictive of trends. How can you make the state smarter using your leadership?
If you could do it by Thursday, that'd be great.
It's very interesting, GovTech at the moment, and one of the things I think, I keep coming back to this, but it doesn't matter whether it's a customer or a citizen, but knowing what people want is really important. And certainly in the GovTech space, and one of the things we do with conversational AI or chatbots, for want of a better term, is allow organizations to talk at scale to their customer base, and particularly in the government area where, if you were able to have these little conversations with people, not annoying them, but, designed correctly, but just to say, hey, tell us what you think. We'd be surprised at how willing people are to share their ideas and thoughts with us, and how much that information could help government to deliver things that shaped around people's lives and not around the convenience of precedent or whatever. So there's a huge opportunity for government there, but huge challenges, and I guess not least in the institutional aspects, the fact that it's hard to change. And is that your experience? Or
yes, but we have thousands of people employed providing services or administering finance, but not many people who are regularly monitoring economics and data. That's a little bit of a hole. The other thing is I think we hinted on this earlier, but generationally, it's probably true the 20s and 30-somethings get digital leadership more than the 50 or 60-somethings as a cliche. How can you empower the older generation without getting rid of them? Because basically, some corporate bodies would just say, we're giving you early retirement, you're not part of the game anymore.
Yeah,
I hate to say that, but training skills, bright futures, all sorts of groups. Even the states are wrestling with the demographic age challenge.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, particularly people who are getting older but not necessarily retiring is interesting. So we do need to make sure that everything's the case.
Can I ask a question as well? Henry, you mentioned about low-hanging fruit and starting small, and I just wondered if you've got some examples of where organisations start, from the ones that you've been working with, in terms of what they look at first, and what sort of generic areas can be potentially useful to start with.
So, I mean, it does very much depend on the business. I think certainly businesses, can benefit hugely from being more data-driven about their customers, and it doesn't matter who or what sort of customer you are. We talk about customer segmentation. People tend to think, well, my customers are law firms, or my customers are, mothers, or whatever. But actually, the data opportunity is as much about detailed insight, higher resolution insight, as anything else. And the more you can drill down into, well, actually, this is a sort of one type of customer that we have, and this is their motivation for doing business with us, and these are their challenges, and these are their desires and needs. And then over here we have some other ones. And actually, when you start to look at it in more detail, you see that there are lots of different types of customer. And then you can start thinking about how, who is our best customer? Which ones do we want to focus on getting, all our energy on getting more of? Because there will be a best customer. There will be a better customer, the best type of customer out there. And that can really help inefficiencies in business development, but also in the, in our chances of converting somebody into a new customer, because we speak their language, we understand their challenges, we're reacting, we're offering a solution to a problem that they definitely feel they have. So I do think customer is a hugely important start point to look at. But if you're in a business where you're processing, for example, a lot of administrative activity, I think automation is a really good potential start point. And a good example of that is any kind of qualification, or so any kind of process. In fact, if you look at the data, you might find that a part of that, some of the activity that comes through that process is quite automatable. There might be a lot of it that still needs to be signed off by a person, or whatever. But it's looking in detail at what those processes and what's flowing through it, to see whether actually we've got this pretty standard thing that happens all the time. I'll tell you what, we could just take that out of the process and start to automate it.
So that's, sorry, it sounds like you're talking about robotic process automation stuff. Is that where you're heading with this?
Sorry,
Sorry, it sounds like you're talking about robotic process automation.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal. So, I mean, in addition to knowing more about our business and being able to make better and smarter decisions, the more we can predict things, the more we can, systemize things.